In this lecture, we're going to talk about personal competence, which includes 3 separate issues. So the first is self-awareness. So this is knowing that you are separate from others, that you are your own unique person. So that's primarily established during the toddler period. So we're not going to talk about that particular issue of personal competence in this class. So instead, we're going to focus on self-concept and self-esteem, which you'll learn more about on the upcoming slides. Self-concept refers to how you describe yourself. So it's just really a fancy way of saying self-description. So our self-description comes from many places. It comes from the beliefs that we hold about ourselves personally, and it also comes from how others respond to us and the kind of information that they give to us. So over the early childhood period, children are exhibiting behaviors, they're watching how people respond to those behaviors, and that's helping to create their definition of self. They're engaging in new behaviors and trying out new activities, and that's giving them information about themselves. They're listening to other people talk about them, listening to what people say about them, listening to how people refer to them. So these are all tools and pieces of information that we use to create our self-concept or our description of self. So this description of self includes personal and tangible assets like I am a girl, I have red hair, I have freckles. You can tell I'm describing myself if you remember from our introduction welcome video and the syllabus video. It also talks about your abilities. I play soccer, I read books, I can do this, I like engaging in these behaviors. Attitudes and values. I believe that diversity is good. I believe in vaccines. I think that it's important to be kind and honest and reliable. So all of these ways that we describe ourselves, all these values and attitudes and abilities and attributes, that all merges into our description of self or our self-concept. So again, just as a reminder, self-concept is essentially a personal description of who you are. In early childhood, children are primarily developing their self-image and their looking glass selves. They are building an image of themselves based on what they see and experience that is informed by how others see and respond to them. Here are some of the ways that children receive information that they use to build their self-concept. For instance, when we describe how children look, tell them that boys don't cry, and encourage them to behave like another child, we are sending messages that children use to build their personal description of self. Just like everything else in the world, the development of self-concept progresses over time, so young children's skills in this area or their descriptions of selves differ from that of older children. So for younger children, they have what's called a categorical self. So they tend to describe themselves in very concrete terms. So they mention things that are observable. Again, I have red hair, I have freckles, I own an iPhone 11, I have a dog named Luna, I like to paint and do home projects. So things that you can see, things you can touch, things that are tangible. So very concrete. So when we think about the self-description or the self-concept of preschoolers, we expect it to be that categorical, concrete kind of self-description. They're not talking about, I am very reliable and I'm kind and, I tend to be moody. They're not going to talk about those internal kinds of things because they're all about things that you can see and feel and touch. So you can see I gave an example. I'm Ella, I'm 3, I'm a big girl, I can carry my backpack all by myself. All very external, concrete kinds of descriptors. So in addition, preschoolers are also working on something called their remembered selves. So they are thinking back to when they were little, which we all know that they're little, but for them, being a baby is even more little. So they like to look at pictures of when they were babies and toddlers and have people tell them stories about themselves when they were even smaller and littler than they are now. So those kinds of memories given to them through pictures and through family stories are really important for helping them to develop that remembered self. They also are starting to work on this inner self, the idea that there might be things about me that not everyone can know and see. So we're not talking about that yet, but at some point we'll be talking a little bit about theory of the mind. You may have talked about that in other classes. So that's the notion that what I think inside my head isn't necessarily what you think inside your head, and you don't know what I'm thinking because it's inside. You can't see it. And this is something that's developed over the preschool period. So this is why this is also an aspect that is developing, is not developed yet, but understanding that you can have an inner self that doesn't have to be shared and that not everybody is going to know about. So by about 3.5, they may start adding in some things that are a little bit more psychological in nature, but still observable. So it's beliefs and attitudes and feelings and emotions, but the ones that you can see. So you can see when you're mad. It is an emotion and it's internal, but you're not hiding it. It's fully out in the open for everyone to see. Who you like to play with. I am playing with that person and I enjoy it. So there's a behavior and a feeling that goes with it, and that's where we see that move towards those more internal psychological things, still as long as they're coupled with absolute concrete behaviors, but they're not going to refer to things that you can't necessarily see that are really more internal in nature. Also, it's very normal for preschoolers to be very possessive. This is actually a healthy sign of a well-developed self-concept, understanding that I am me, I am my own separate person, I have my own description of self, and these things that I have, they are part of me, they are part of my self-description. So when you touch my toy, you're not just touching a toy, you're touching a part of me, because I'm playing with it and I'm now using that to describe myself. It goes along with me and who I am, so you touching it, I'm going to get very upset because you're crossing into my boundaries. So it may seem very selfish, but that possessiveness is a good, healthy sign of a well-developed self-concept. I would also encourage you to take a look at the link that leads you to the virtual lab school. It, in general, has great information at the virtual lab school site, but gives you some more information about self-concept. Developmental milestones that we expect to see with regard to self-concept are the following on this slide. So by about age 3, we expect children to be able to identify themselves and other people as belonging to groups. So they may use gender as a definition for groups. They may use race. They may use language. So it's going to be things that they can see. So things that are obvious. I'm a big kid, you're a baby, I'm a boy, you're a girl, I have brown skin, you have white skin. Those are going to be obvious things to 3-year-olds, but they are going to start putting themselves into groups and then noticing where other people or children might be in other groups. By age 4, they really like to describe their own characteristics. So they talk about what they look like, they talk about what behaviors they engage in, and they tend to describe all of these things positively. So a preschooler, a 4-year-old is never bad at anything. They can run fast, they can brush their teeth all by themselves, they can get dressed, they can do all kinds of things. So you generally won't hear a preschooler saying that they can't do something or they don't know how to do something. Preschoolers generally talk about all the things they can do, not about the things that they can't do. So once children get to about 5, then not only can they describe themselves, but they start noticing differences in people around them, and this may lead them to saying, oh, I can do this, but I can't do that. That person can do that. I can or I can't. So I remember in kindergarten, my son came home and told me that there was a boy in his class who could read chapter books. and he had noticed that he was not able to read chapter books yet, that he could read some things, but that he couldn't read chapter books. So recognizing that people have different skills and abilities is something that starts to come around age 5. In middle childhood, children describes themselves not only in explicable terms, so I am a boy, I am a girl, I have red hair, like they do in early childhood, but they also start describing themselves in behavioral terms. So they talk about things that they can do, things that they enjoy, behaviors that they exhibit. So we're adding on a little bit of dimension to self-concept. So we're moving past kind of self-descriptors of just physical things to things that they enjoy engaging in. Another change in middle childhood, once kids get to the 6 to 8 period, is they're not just kind of generally, I'm good at everything, or I am this way, but they're beginning to understand that they have different definitions of self or different descriptions of self in different areas. So they start to separate out those descriptions of self in terms of how they do socially, how they do physically, and how they do academically. So rather than just social and then kind of everything else, it's now distinguishing among these 3 categories of self-description or self-concept. One thing that also starts here, and this we'll come back to when we talk about self-esteem, is that children start kind of looking around a little bit more. So it's not just kind of the me self, but it's also the self that's perceived by others, what we see other people doing. So looking and saying, wow, that person can read really well, or that person cuts with scissors very well, and I either am better at that or I am worse than that, depending on my own self-definition. But definitely looking around more rather than just looking at myself without sensing what other people are doing. I'm looking around and making those social comparisons. So because of that, and just because of cognitive skills and more time spent, children tend to describe themselves more accurately once they get to middle childhood. Preschool age children tend to say they're good at everything, whereas children in middle childhood are generally more able to talk specifically about things that they are personally good at versus things that maybe they are less good at or haven't had the opportunity to try. So those are some of the changes that we see in middle childhood with self-concept. Self-esteem differs from self-concept in that it is a judgment of our description of self. So I can describe myself in a multitude of ways. I can describe myself as being good at things or bad at things. I can talk about things I like or I dislike. But when I start to place judgment on that description, judgment about how I feel about myself, then that's when it becomes self-esteem. So I'm not super computer proficient, and I'm okay with that. It doesn't make me feel bad about myself because it's okay. So I really want you to understand that just because someone describes themselves negatively doesn't mean that that is related to their self-esteem. Our self-description does include positive things and negative things, and things we'd like to work on and things that we already think we're good at. That's just simply describing our skills and abilities. How you feel about those skills and abilities is what constitutes self-esteem. It is important to understand that knowing you aren't good at something doesn't necessarily mean you have low self-esteem. I can describe myself as having poor math skills, which is part of my self-concept, and still have good self-worth. My worth comes more from how important I think math is and whether I believe that I could be better if I tried. If I don't care that much about math and believe that I could change my skills with effort, likely my self-esteem will remain intact. Unlike some of the developmental domains that we're discussing in this class, there is not information in the infant, toddler, or preschool learning foundations about the development of self-esteem, so I'm just going to give you some developmental milestones that come from other places. So in terms of self-esteem, we know that young children generally don't think about themselves as being worthy in different kinds of categories. So as we get older, we evaluate our skills, our self-concept, and our worthiness, our self-esteem, in different areas. So we might think about ourselves in terms of relationships, in terms of academics, in terms of sports. But young children, they just kind of have a general self-concept and a general sense of self-esteem. So really the only thing that they can pick out is their social competence and how they feel about that particular aspect of themselves, and then everything else is lumped together. So you can see that children are able to distinguish social competence, how well others like them, and then they have just general competence, how good they are at doing things, and then they can think about how they feel about those aspects of themselves, whether they find it bothersome that they're not good at something or whether it doesn't really affect them in that way. Eventually, as they get older, once they get into elementary school, then they'll start adding in other dimensions. They'll break that general competence into dimensions such as physical and academic competence. So in general, the beautiful part about early childhood is that preschoolers typically feel good about themselves in all aspects. They, like I said, they rate themselves as being able to do everything, and honestly, they feel pretty good about themselves. Most preschoolers don't feel bad about themselves. There are those occasional preschoolers, though, who have developed what's called learned helplessness. So they don't seem to think that they are capable of doing things, and then this does make them feel bad. And then unfortunately, this feeling incapable and this lower self-esteem makes them less confident and then makes them less willing to try new things. And unfortunately, this is a time in life when it's really important to try new things. So I would encourage you to take a look at the article that I've included so you can see more about learned helplessness and what that is referring to and what it means. And then usually, again, so unless a child has developed learned helplessness, usually that feeling good about yourself, feeling confident, being willing to try new things also manifests itself in 5-year-olds who are pretty good about sticking it out and continuing to work on things even when they become difficult. Although self-esteem is generally not an issue for preschoolers, for those who are experiencing issues with self-esteem, so those preschoolers who are experiencing learned helplessness, who not only are describing themselves as not being able to do things, but seem uncomfortable with trying new things, seem upset by their lack of abilities, these are the little friends that we want to get in there and help out as soon as we can, because there is evidence to show that low self-esteem can lead to a variety of negative developmental outcomes. So you can see on this slide that low self-esteem can lead to lower academic performance, behavior issues, decreased psychological functioning, and reduced physical health. Parents can influence children's self-esteem in 2 primary ways. So one is by being responsive. So this starts when children are babies, so we don't want to wait until the preschool period for this part, but when we are responsive to babies, when we come when they're crying, when they hold them, when they want to be held, when we talk to them and have conversations with them and give them messages of trust and love and let them know through our responsiveness how important they are. This helps babies to understand that they matter and that they can also control the environment. So if I cry and someone comes to me, I learn that my cries matter, that I can reach out and I can make sounds and I can get people to do things that I need, that I do have some measure of control over the things that happen to me and the things that are in my environment. And this helps children to develop what's called an internal locus of control, where you believe that you can make things happen. This is where self-efficacy comes from. If you have self-efficacy, you likely have an internal locus of control, and you know that you can make things happen if you need to. An external locus of control, on the other hand, when you haven't had that kind of responsiveness, you believe that things just happen to you, that you don't have any control over your life and how things occur. So when children come into early childhood and beyond with this internal locus of control, this feeling of self-efficacy, they believe that they can do things, and that makes them feel good about themselves. So that's one way that we can help indirectly affect self-esteem. Another way is by using authoritative parenting or child rearing strategies. So allowing children to explore within the boundaries of their developmental age and period. So being warm and accepting, understanding children's need to do things independently, to be autonomous, to take initiative. When we are respectful of the things that children are trying to accomplish and the tasks that they're trying to perform, we send a message that you are capable, I will support you, and that also helps children to be willing to explore and try new things and feel good about themselves. Teachers also influence children's self-esteem. So when teachers have appropriate expectations for children, when they send messages about whether children can or cannot do something. So if you believe that a child can be a good reader and you encourage them to try again when they make a mistake and to continue reading and to try out new books, you're sending messages that that child is capable and they can do it. And then they start to absorb those messages and use it to create their own self-concept and to feel good about their efforts and have good, high self-esteem. If you send other kinds of messages, don't worry about it, it's a hard word, you don't need to read that one, or how about you try a book that's not so hard, you're sending other kinds of messages that imply that a child can't do something, and then maybe that will negatively affect their self-esteem. So this relates to something called the Pygmalion effect. I would encourage you to click on the link on this slide so you can learn more about the Pygmalion effect, but there is strong evidence to show that when teachers believe something about a child, that tends to come true. So unfortunately, if you believe that children aren't capable, over time they will perhaps become incapable of doing something just by virtue of your beliefs about them and the expectations that you hold for them. Another thing that's important to pay attention here is the kinds of classroom environments that we set up. So when children are publicly evaluated, when their names go up on the board, when check marks go up next to their names, when they have to turn their card or move a piece of their pyramid, when their reading scores are published for everyone to see, those kinds of things quickly move from, I know that kid reads better than me, to, wow, I now feel really bad about the way that I read, because everybody can see it and everybody can see that I don't read as well as everybody else. So when we have those kinds of public displays and evaluative kinds of systems, it quickly moves from, a self-description where maybe I know that I'm not able to do something quite as well as someone else, to really feeling kind of publicly humiliated about that deficit. Peers also influence children's self-esteem. So we know that when children have the opportunity to display a variety of skills when they're interacting with their peers, that this actually makes them feel more competent and capable and comfortable, and kids who are competent and capable and comfortable tend to do well with their peers. So giving children lots of developmentally appropriate materials that meet a variety of interests and needs is one way to help children to feel good. And then when children feel good, and they're more likely to play with other children because they're in those environments where there's lots of interesting, relevant, fun things to do, they get to know other kids better, and then kids who are more well-liked have higher self-esteem. So we know that those two things go together. So when kids are well-liked by their peers, they feel good about themselves. So in the previous 3 slides, we've already talked about things that we can do to increase children's self-esteem, but just to add on to that, one, we can give something called unconditional positive regard. So this is when you send a message to children that they are liked and respected and honored no matter what. So even if they do something that's not okay, That doesn't define them, that you like them, that you enjoy their company. That goes a long way towards making kids feel good about themselves, giving them honest recognition and praise. So if there's something you need to work on, just simply stating what it is that needs to be worked on without any evaluative judgments on that. And when children have done something well, also commenting authentically and favorably on those things. So, try and avoid kind of meaningless, empty praise, like, you're a bad kid or a good girl, but be specific. I noticed when you did this, that made so-and-so feel really happy. Or next time, maybe we could think about doing it this way because I saw that so-and-so looked a little unhappy when you were doing that. So getting children used to really being able to think about what they can do to make their world better and fit with their needs. Respecting children, listening to them, setting appropriate boundaries, not letting children get away with too much or not being too rigid and strict, being friendly, explaining the reason behind the rules that you have. These are all things that make children feel good and confident and capable. When children are having a hard time, find ways to help them to navigate tasks so that they can do something better. Helping them to not give up, helping them to keep trying, helping them to challenge themselves, giving them opportunities to do things independently and to make choices. These are all things that make children feel competent, and often when we do feel competent, that does tend to lend itself to also feeling good about that competence. And then also helping children to have that emotional regulation and understanding that we were talking about previously. When children can express their emotions and control their emotions and exhibit emotions in socially appropriate ways, then they don't have people who are looking at them askance and making them feel bad about their displays of emotion that aren't as socially accepted. And so feeling in control and command of your emotions and your person and yourself is another way to feel good as well.